Jai Maharaj, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Kendra Prabhu. How's your voice? Should we have someone else lead Kirtan?
It's improving, but I was still resting it. I was going to ask if either I could play Prabhupada chanting Hare Krishna or if your good self would like to lead. Otherwise, I'm thinking I should still not lead any solo kirtans.
Because there are other things going on here.
Sure.
I think if you play a tape, that's nice.
All right, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare
Mother Ki Jai. Welcome to all. We're continuing our Chaitanya Charitamrita weekly reading. Today is February 24th, 2023 in Vrindavan, one day earlier in New York. And we're continuing from Adi Leela, chapter 5, text 41, continuing in the purport. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Kyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Miditam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Sthapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kodam Mahyam Tadhati Shapadantikam Bandehang Shri Guru Shri Jatapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagar Shatam Sahagana Raganatan Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savatutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lolita Sri Vishakhan Vitamscha Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Shamaniti Nami Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauramani Pracharya Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashtachadeshatarane Vanshako Pitarubhyascha Kripasindho Pyevacha Ditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kamshana Goulangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hori Priya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivashadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. We're continuing this purport. The chapter concerns the glories of Lord Nityananda Prabhu, and Srila Kaviraj Goswami has told us that Nityananda Prabhu is non-different from Lord Balaram. In that regard, he's further explained that Lord Balaram is the source of all material and spiritual creations or existences. And he's given us some picture of the geography of the spiritual world, Vaikuntha and Goloka Vrindavani. And now in this section, there's a discussion of the Chaturvyuha, the expansions of the Lord as Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Srila Shankaracharya, Sripad Shankaracharya, in his Vedanta commentary, has taken a position, in, of course, impersonalist position. Reading the purport, I find it a little difficult to understand what his actual stand is, what the Purvapaksha, the opposing view that we have to respond to, is. But from what I can see, it's an impersonalist position. He seems to take the stand of he seems to identify these Chaturvyuha more with the material principles that they represent intelligence, ego, and so on. And he denies the capability, or denies that the Lord expands himself in these forms, because expansion would involve some sort of material sequence, of material principles of cause and effect, beginning and end, and so on. So I suppose to really get a full picture of what Shankaracharya is saying here, one would have to read his Vedanta commentary on the relevant verse. But we have enough for now. And in this section, Srila Prabhupada is going to present what the Vaishnavacharyas say. In his Lagu Bhagavatamrita, Purva 5, 165 through 193, Srila Rupa Goswami has refuted the charges directed against the devotees by Sripad Shankaracharya regarding their explanation of the quadruple forms Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradumna, and Aniruddha. Rupa Goswami says that these four expansions of Narayan are present in the spiritual sky, where they are famous as Mahavastha. Among them, Vasudeva is worshipped within the heart by meditation, because he is the predominating deity of the heart, as explained in Srimad Bhagavatam 4.3.23. Sankarshan, the second expansion, is Vasudeva's personal expansion for pastimes. And since he is the reservoir of all living entities, he is sometimes called Jiva. The beauty of Sankarshan is greater than that of innumerable full moons radiating light beams. He is worshipable as the principle of ego. He has invested Anantadev with all the potencies of sustenance. For the dissolution of the creation, he also exhibits himself as the supersoul in the Rudra, in a dharma, the personality of a irreligion, in Sarpa, snakes, in Antaka, Yamraj, the Lord of Death, and in the demons. Pradumna, the third manifestation, appears from Sankarshan. Those who are especially intelligent worship this Pradumna expansion of Sankarshan as the principle of the intelligence. The goddess of fortune always chants the glories of Pradumna in the place known as Ilavrtavarsha, and she always serves him with great devotion. That would be explained in the 5th canto. His complexion appears sometimes golden and sometimes bluish, like new monsoon clouds in the sky. He is the origin of the creation of the material world, and he has invested his creative principle in Cupid. It is by his direction only that all men and demigods and other living entities function with energy for regeneration. Aniruddha, the fourth of the quadruple expansions, is worshipped by great sages and psychologists as the principle of the mind. His complexion is similar to the bluish hue of a blue cloud. He engages in the maintenance of the cosmic manifestation and is the supersoul of Dharma, the deity of religiosity, the Manus, the progenitors of mankind, and the Devatas, demigods. Moksha Dharma Vedic scripture indicates that Pradyumna is the deity of the total mind, whereas Aniruddha is the deity of the total ego. The previous statements regarding the quadruple forms are confirmed in the Pancharatra Tantras in all respects. So we see here that all of these four deities have their personal existence and their personal qualities. They are predominating deities of mind, intelligence, ego, and so on. But they're not identical with these things. When Sankarshan is called Jiva, it doesn't mean that he is a Jiva, or that he's even though the totality of the Jivas in some abstract sense. Rather, he's controller of the Jivas, or the Jivas are expanded from him. But he maintains his personal identity. In the Laghu Bhagavatamrita, Purva 586 through 100, there's a lucid explanation of the inconceivable potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Negating Shankaracharya's statements, Mahavaraha Purana declares, Sarve Nitya Shashvatascha Dehastasya Paratmanaha Anopadana Rohita Naiva Prakritija Kvachit. All the varied expansions of the personality of Godhead are transcendental and eternal, and all of them repeatedly descend to all the different universes of the material creation. Their bodies, composed of eternity, bliss, and knowledge, are everlasting. There's no chance of their decaying, for they are not creations of the material world. Their forms are concentrated spiritual existence, always complete with all spiritual qualities and devoid of material contamination. Now, I'll read the next paragraph and then we'll take a question. Confirming these statements, the Narada Pancharatra asserts, Manir yata vipagena nilapitadibhir yutaha rupa pedam avapnoti jnana pedat tatachutaha. The infallible personality of Godhead can manifest his body in different ways according to different modes of worship, just as the Vaidurya gem can manifest itself in various colors, such as blue and yellow. Each incarnation is distinct from all the others. This is possible by the Lord's inconceivable potency, by which he can simultaneously represent himself as one, as various partial forms, and as the origin of these partial forms. Nothing is impossible for his inconceivable potencies. Now let's see what this purport, what this question is about. Saraswati. If Vasudeva is represented as the Supersoul, Paramatma, present in all conditions, Jivas only, do spiritual bodies also have Paramatma too? As far as I understand, the Paramatma is only necessary in the material world. Prabhupada gives the example that when there's Kumbh Mela, the police force expands itself. Those who've been to Kumbh Mela know that there's an enormous police presence, not enormous in comparison to the number of people there, but the number of police you have to help manage the affairs of the Mela is considerable. So they have their big outpost, and they have so many police deputed to perform various functions for law and order. And that all is expanded from the police force as long as the Mela is going on. And then when the Mela is over, the police force is absorbed back into the its usual source. So the super soul, the super soul is manifested in the material world when there's a need, when the conditioned souls are present in the material world. Then the super soul is there, Matasmriti Gyanam Pohanam Cha, to give knowledge and forgetfulness. Yes, Matasmriti Gyanam Pohanam Cha. Upadrashtanumantam Cha, to oversee and permit the activities of the conditioned souls. But in the spiritual world, there's no such need. Meena Devi, can you help me understand about Cupid? What would you like to understand about Cupid? There's a discussion about Pradyumna and Cupid in the section of 10th canto concerning Pradyumna's kidnapping and his marrying Mayavati and so on. And it's not so easy to follow. Apparently, Jiva Goswami and other acharyas have commented extensively on the question: is Pradyumna Cupid? Is he different from Cupid? Is he? How is Cupid manifest in relation to Pradyumna? Is the son of Krishna named Pradyumna the same as the Pradyumna of the Chaturvyuha? All these questions have come up. The summary understanding seems to be that is Pradyumna, who's the son of Krishna, is invested with or includes in his potencies those of Cupid, although he maintains his own identity. Apart from that, Cupid, generally speaking, his function is well known. He arouses sex desire in the conditioned souls. Our Hari Parshad Prabhu has quoted a verse from one poet. I don't know the Sanskrit, but the purport is that an expert archer, those who are truly expert, can take an arrow and split it. That is, they can aim at an arrow and split it in two, or they could take anything and split it in two. Those who are expert archers, sometimes you'll see a demonstration, they'll shoot an arrow in such a way that something is split in two. But Cupid is such an expert archer that he can take two and make them one. So he controls the conditioned souls through in this regard, in regard to Kama. And therefore he himself is sometimes called Kamdev, or usually called Kamadev. Cupid is our English word. Oh, that's okay. Well, let's see. Oh, I see. Okay. And there's a couple things. The Saraswati, not Saraswati, Meena says, forgive my ignorance that I didn't see the whole Cupid question. I always kind of clumped Cupid in with Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and the Easter Bunny. Yeah, okay. But there's, you can't clump lust in with the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, or the Easter Bunny. Lust is palpable, lust is manifest, lust is a sure thing. And we understand from Shastra that all of these material forces are controlled in various ways. They're not just independently acting. Even the body and its limbs are controlled by various demigods. This is explained in the second canto and elsewhere. Third canto it comes up also. That even to move your eyebrow requires the cooperation of a particular demigod who controls that part of the body. Or to give perhaps an easier example, the eye, which I think of as mine, and seeing is believing, and show me, and all of that. But my eye is not under my control exclusively. The eye is dependent on a larger system. For vision to take place, there has to be the eye, the physical organ, and there has to be something to see, a sense object, an object of vision. And there has to be light. Without light, our eyes are useless. So all of these conditions need to be met for vision to take place. And especially that condition of light is dependent on the sun, ultimately, even if we're using fossil fuels. Finally, we go back to the sun. So the sun is the controlling deity of the eyes. Even if you're in astrology, if your sun is debilitated in your chart, you may have eye problems because the sun is the predominating deity of the eyes. So in this way, the entire structure of the body, the eyes and the ears, they have their controllers, the tongue, Varuna Dev, because he's in charge of water, and then the tongue needs water in order to function. So these various deities are responsible for the workings of the various parts of the material body. And not only the material body, but the material environment also. So the hurricanes and tornadoes and so on, we were reading in Bhagavatam, have to do with Lord Shiva. When these things are present, Lord Shiva's influence is seen. And there's, on a bright sunny day, then we know that the sun god is prominent by his activities and influence. So that we just see in terms of ourselves, or in terms of what we think ourselves to be. But there's this whole background of control. Yes, an adidaivic background, the background of control by the demigods. And this lust is also controlled by a particular demigod. That's Kamadev. So we think Tooth Fairy or whatever, but these things all have their analytical or scientific background in Vedic knowledge. They're not just nice stories, little water. They're not just nice stories or mythological figures. Okay. There's a second part to Saraswati's question. In the Krishna book, we know that Krishna has many children. So how are they regenerated? Not like the way humans reproduce. In the Krishna book, of course, these in the spiritual world, there's no existence of, there's no regeneration or generation at all. Everything is eternal. But when Dwarka appears on earth, or the Lord appears on earth, then things have to conform to the usual, what would you say, customs of the workings of the world. So when Krishna disappears, for example, he doesn't just disappear in a cloud of mist, but there's a pastime. He's shot in the foot by an arrow and disappears. Or in Vrindavan, Krishna performs the pastime of growing up from babyhood to childhood and so on. In the spiritual world, that kind of growth is not required. We're not part of the picture. So as to the children, they're generated in the usual way, as far as I understand. And they're born. We hear that Pradyumna was born to Krishna and Rukmini. So although these are all unborn personalities, they appear to take birth within the context of Krishna's pastimes. Then Saraswati says, if Paramatma gives knowledge and forgetfulness and so on to conditional souls, then the Yoga Maya does this in the spiritual world. Because we see the pure souls sometimes forget that Krishna is Bhagavan and sometimes remember his position. Yes, in the material world, there's the super soul, and in the spiritual world, the Yoga Maya is there. Yeah. Okay. So Shankaracharya seems to have difficulties with the idea that personality of Godhead could appear in different expansions, proceeding from one another. But here we find that there's no difficulty. He can simultaneously be one and many, just as the Vaidurya stone can be seen with different colors. Krishna is one without a second, but he manifests himself in different bodies, as stated by Narada in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Vitram pataitad ekena vapusha yugapat pratak griheshu drashta sahasrang striya eka udavahat. It's wonderful indeed that one Krishna has simultaneously become different Krishnas in 16,000 palaces to accept 16,000 queens as his wives. The Padma Purana also explains, Sadevo bahudha bhutva nirguna purushottamaha eki bhuya punashete nirdosho harirādikrit. The same personality of Godhead, Purushottam, the original person, who's always devoid of material qualities and contamination, can exhibit himself in various forms and at the same time lie down in one form. In the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said, Yajanti twan mayastvam vai bahu murtyeka murtikam. O my Lord, although you manifest yourself in varieties of forms, you are one without a second. Therefore, pure devotees concentrate upon you and worship only you. In the Kurma Purana, it is said, Astulas chanunush chaiva, stulonus chaiva sarvataha, avarna sarvata prokta, shamo raktantalochanaha. The Lord is personal, although impersonal. He is atomic, although great. And he is blackish and has red eyes, although he is colorless. By material calculation, all this may appear contradictory. But if we understand that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has inconceivable potencies, we can accept these facts as eternally possible in him. In our present condition, we cannot understand the spiritual activities and how they occur. But although they are inconceivable in the material context, we should not disregard such contradictory conceptions. Although it is apparently inconceivable, it is quite possible for the Absolute to reconcile all opposing elements. Srimad Bhagavatam establishes this in the 6th canto. O my Lord, your transcendental pastimes and enjoyments all appear inconceivable because they are not limited by the causal and effective actions of material thought. You can do everything without performing bodily work. The Vedas say that the Absolute Truth has multifarious potencies and does not need to do anything personally. My dear Lord, you are entirely devoid of material qualities. Without anyone's help, you can create, maintain, and dissolve the entire qualitative material manifestation. Yet in all such activities, you do not change. You do not accept the results of your activities, unlike ordinary demons and demigods who suffer or enjoy the reactions of their activities in the material world. Unaffected by the reactions of work, you eternally exist with your full spiritual potency. This we cannot fully understand. Because you are unlimited in your 6 opulences, no one can count your transcendental qualities. Philosophers and other thoughtful persons are overwhelmed by the contradictory manifestations of the physical world and the propositions of logical arguments and judgments. Because they are bewildered by word jugglery and disturbed by the different calculations of the scriptures. Their theories cannot touch you, who are the ruler and controller of everyone, and whose glories are beyond conception. Your inconceivable potency keeps you unattached to the mundane qualities, surpassing all conceptions of material contemplation. Your pure transcendental knowledge keeps you beyond all speculative processes. By your inconceivable potency, there is nothing contradictory in you. People may sometimes think of you as impersonal or personal, but you are one. For persons who are confused or bewildered, a rope may appear to manifest itself as different kinds of snakes. For similar confused persons who are uncertain about you, you create various philosophical methods in pursuance of their uncertain positions. So here, we read earlier that Shankaracharya has given various logical propositions about the Chaturvyuha and about the absolute truth, and stated that this is impossible, or that's impossible, or this is contradictory, or that's contradictory. But here we find that this is the capability of the personality of Godhead. He can do that which is contradictory. He can defy the limits of our logic and our speculative thinking. He can do everything Parasya Shaktir Vividaya Vishriyate by his energies. And yes. Okay. We should always remember the differences between spiritual and material actions. The Supreme Lord, being all spiritual, can perform any act without extraneous help. In the material world, if we want to manufacture an earthen pot, we need the ingredients, a machine, and also a laborer. But we should not extend this idea to the actions of the Supreme Lord, for he can create anything in a moment without that which appears necessary in our own conception. When the Lord appears as an incarnation to fulfill a particular purpose, this does not indicate that he's unable to fulfill it without appearing. He can do anything simply by his will. But by his causeless mercy, he appears to be dependent upon his devotees. He appears as the son of Yashodamata, not because he's dependent on her care, but because he accepts such a role by his causeless mercy. When he appears for the protection of his devotees, he naturally accepts trials and tribulations on their behalf. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the Lord, being equally disposed toward every living being, has no enemies and no friends, but that he has special affection for a devotee who always thinks of him in love. Therefore, neutrality and partiality are both among the transcendental qualities of the Lord, and they are properly adjusted by his inconceivable energies. The Lord is Brahma, or the source of the impersonal Brahma, which is his all-pervading feature of neutrality. In his personal feature, however, as the owner of all transcendental opulences, the Lord displays his partiality by taking the side of his devotees. Partiality, neutrality, and all such qualities are present in God. Otherwise, they could not be experienced in the creation. Since he is the total existence, all things are properly adjusted in the absolute. In the relative world, such qualities are displayed in a perverted manner, and therefore we experience non-duality as a perverted reflection. Because there's no logic to explain how things happen in the realm of spirit, the Lord is sometimes described as being beyond the range of experience. But if we simply accept the Lord's inconceivability, we can then adjust all things in him. Non-devotees cannot understand the Lord's inconceivable energy, and consequently, for them it is said that he's beyond the range of conceivable expression. The author of the Brahma Sutras, Vedanta Sutras, accepts this fact and says, Shrutes tu shabdamulatvat, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, being inconceivable to an ordinary man, can be understood only through the evidence of the Vedic injunctions. The Skanda Purana confirms, Achintya kaluye bhava natams tarakena yojayet. Matters inconceivable to a common man should not be a subject for argument. We find very wonderful qualities even in such material things as jewels and drugs. Indeed, their qualities often appear inconceivable. Therefore, if we do not attribute inconceivable potencies to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we cannot establish his supremacy. It is because of these inconceivable potencies that the glories of the Lord have always been accepted as difficult to understand. Ignorance and the jugglery of words are very common in human society, but they do not help one understand the inconceivable energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If we accept such ignorance and word jugglery, we cannot accept the Supreme Lord's perfections. For example, one of the opulences of the Supreme Lord is complete knowledge. Therefore, how could ignorance be conceivable in him? Vedic instructions and sensible arguments establish that the Lord's maintaining the cosmic manifestation and simultaneously being indifferent to the activities of its maintenance cannot be contradictory because of his inconceivable energies. To a person who's always absorbed in the thought of snakes, a rope always appears to be a snake. And similarly, to a person bewildered by material qualities and devoid of knowledge of the Absolute, the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears according to diverse, bewildered conclusions. So Srila Prabhupada is stressing again and again, the importance of inconceivable qualities, of Chincha Shakti, inconceivable energies in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he makes the point that there are inconceivable qualities even in material things. How does a drug work? It's just a little chemical, but it does amazing things. So many things that we don't really understand. There's some sort of explanation, superficial explanation, but we don't understand it. We certainly don't understand consciousness and how it works. And so there are various speculative theories about consciousness being a sophisticated product of intricate material conditions But really, we don't understand consciousness. We don't really understand it. This individual subjective existence is very difficult for us to understand. But there it is. There's so many things that we don't understand. And certainly the personality of Godhead is beyond our understanding. Therefore, he's inconceivable, but he has potencies because he's able to do things. He gets things done. So that's our practical experience of the material world. There are things happening, there are things being done. There are varieties manifest. So this has to be on account of the absolute truth. But how is the absolute truth doing all of these things? In summary, it said that he does them by inconceivable potencies. Someone might argue that the absolute would be affected by duality if he were both all cognizance, Brahman, and the personality of Godhead with 6 opulences in full. To refute such an argument, the aphorism Swarupa Dvayam Ikshate declares that in spite of appearances, there's no chance of duality in the absolute, for he is but one in diverse manifestations. Understanding that the absolute displays varied pastimes by the influence of his energies at once removes the apparent incongruity of his inconceivably opposite energies. Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, gives the following description of the inconceivable potency of the Lord. Karmanyani hasya bhavo bhavasyate durgashrayo tari payat palayanam kalatmano yat pramada yutashraya swatman rate kidyati tir vidam iha. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead has nothing to do, he nevertheless acts. Although he's always unborn, he nevertheless takes birth. Although he's time, fearful to everyone, he flees Mathura in fear of his enemy to take shelter in a fort. And although he is self-sufficient, he marries 16,000 women. These pastimes seem like bewildering contradictions, even to the most intelligent. Had these activities of the Lord not been a reality, sages would not have been puzzled by them. Therefore, such activities should never be considered imaginary. Whenever the Lord desires, his inconceivable energy, Yoga Maya, serves him in creating and performing such pastimes. The scriptures known as the Pancharatra Shastras are recognized Vedic scriptures that have been accepted by the great acharyas. These scriptures are not products of the modes of passion and ignorance. Learned scholars and brahmanas, therefore, always refer to them as Sattvata Samhitas. The original speaker of these scriptures is Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is especially mentioned in the Moksha Dharma 349-68, which is part of the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata. Liberated sages like Narada and Vyas, who are free from the 4 defects of conditioned souls, are the propagators of these scriptures. Sri Narad Muni is the original speaker of the Pancharatra Shastras. Srimad Bhagavatam is also considered a Sattvata Samhita. Indeed, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu declared, Srimad Bhagavatam Purana Mamalam. Srimad Bhagavatam is a spotless Purana. Malicious editors and scholars who attempt to misrepresent the Pancharatra Shastras to refute their regulations are most abominable. In the modern age, such malicious scholars have even commented misleadingly upon the Bhagavad Gita, which was spoken by Krishna, to prove that there's no Krishna. How the Mayavadis have misrepresented the Pancharatrika Vidhi will be shown below. So we can end our reading there for the day. There's, as we see, quite a lot here and more still to come. The Chaitanya Charitamrita. Okay, let's see. In the chat box, I think that's just the text. No, there is a question too. Oh, there's a lot. Sorry. Praveen, argument. If the Vaishnavas can't explain how has one form of Vishnu come from another, although all are eternal, they dismiss it as inconceivable. When we say that the Supreme becomes subjected to Maya, they cannot consider it inconceivable. I'm not quite sure I understand that. I guess we invoke inconceivability when we want to. But that's our prerogative on the strength of Shastras. Even if you think that the Supreme becomes subjected to Maya, he can do that if he wants. He can appear as though subject to the laws that affect conditioned souls, and yet he can be unlimited. He can be tied up by ropes by Yashoda Mai, and he can still accommodate all the universes within his transcendental form. So these are the inconceivable capabilities of the personality of Godhead. The Mayavadis may say, our main question for them is, where do varieties come from if everything is one? And they can say also that that's inconceivable. But then there must be some mechanism in place that makes these things happen. The Vaishnava philosophy explains that there are potencies at work, and they're inconceivable, but they're there, and they belong to the personality of Godhead, and they're confirmed in the Shastras. Rasa Shakti Vividaiva Shruyate. Without that, you just have to say, well, it's inconceivable, and not even have anything more than that to go on. Tulsi Priya says in a prior paragraph, Prabhupada says of Krishna, since he's the total existence, all things are properly adjusted in the absolute. Yes. And the next paragraph, it says, how could ignorance be conceivable in him? So is ignorance merely the absence of knowledge, or is Krishna, while not being an ignorance himself, also the source of ignorance, since he's the total existence, which would include ignorance, in which all things are properly adjusted? Yes, ignorance is also a manifestation from Krishna. Prabhupada explains that the sun evaporates water from the ocean, and then you get clouds, which are the opposite of sunlight, which block sunlight, which create obscurity. Yes. So the ignorance also is manifested by the personality of Godhead. In the Bhagavatam, we find that ignorance is undivided. So everything is included, including ignorance. The modes of nature are manifestations of the potency, unlimited potency of the personality of Godhead. All right, let's stop here and have a little kirtan if we can. And it can't be by Kendra Prabhu because his voice needs a little rest. And so who would like to lead kirtan today? Everyone's storming the gates. Mukunda Charan, why don't you lead kirtan?
Unfortunately, I am in a busy kitchen right now, so.
Okay, then that's not possible. Anyone else, step forward and please chant Hare Krishna Sankarshan. Anyone.
I'll do it.
Okay, you're in.
Unless somebody else jumps in right now. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajakacharya Stotra Shri Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai, Nam Acharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sham Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Navadip Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanande. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Tulsi Priya. And thank you to all the devotees. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari Bol. All right, so I will end the meeting, or at least I will leave. I don't know.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you so much, Tulsi.
Hare
Yeah.
Krishna.
Thank
Hare
you,
Krishna.
Maharaj. Thank you, Tulsi Priya, for leading Kirtan.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Thank you, Mukund Sharma. And thank you to all. Hare Krishna.